Welcome to the Bad Roman Podcast. On this show, we talk with veterans, community leaders, Christians and non-Christians as we explore the entanglement of Christians with the state. The Bad Roman Project was created out of the firm belief that as Christians, we are called to follow Christ, not the state. Here is your host, Craig Harguess.
Hey folks, let's talk about Judas Iscariot a little bit today. When you think of Judas, what is the first thing that comes to mind? More often than not, betrayal comes to mind. But have you ever considered Judas to be the OG Christian nationalist? Domenic Scarcella comes back on the show to discuss this very curious topic.
Let's go. Yeah. Left, right, left, right, left. We got our marching orders, man. Left, right, left, right. Would you rather serve God than serve Caesar? You feel me? Right. I'm just trying to live what he said. I'm just trying to live.
Domenic, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Craig. Great to be here. Great to be at the Bad Roman Podcast again.
I remember the first time you came on the show, we had such a fun conversation. People really gravitated towards right after your book came out, and Good Neighbor, Bad Citizen, which I really enjoyed. It was everything you said in that book is something I agreed with wholeheartedly all the way through it. So that was a fun conversation.
Yes, I enjoyed it too. In fact, I just referenced it in a recent Substack article, all the way back to that conversation in the fall of 2023. So yeah.
Has it been that long?
It's been that long, yeah. The book came out in October of 2023, and you and I spoke in November, and it was published first Thursday of December.
Wow, I did not realize this. It's been almost 2 years. I guess time flies when you're having fun.
Right?
You know. Well, what have you been up to since the last time you were on the show almost 2 years ago?
Well, the Substack I had just launched when we spoke in 2023. I think it's up over 90 weekly articles at this point. So it's been almost 2 years that I've been writing weekly on Substack. It's been almost a year that I do my own podcast on Sundays. That's a half hour called the Sunday Buffet, where I do not only news items from the week that I've done, but there's also a Bible study every week from the early church anarchist voluntarist standpoint. And beginning this calendar year for 2025, I also do a guided meditation series. So the Substack now has 3 weekly posts. My little experiment from 2023, which was, my goodness, what am I going to write about once a week? I seem to have found something to write about every week so far. And then in cutting back on social media use and scrolling, I basically do what I used to do on social media, which was share articles and things. I just do that on Sundays on my own podcast. Like, here's some stuff I found during the week.
Right.
And in wanting to get more into, because my book was written so that it could be used as a meditative aid if you wanted it, I decided, why don't I expand in that direction as well? And I started doing guided meditations in 2025 called FM Radio, Friday Meditation Radio. So the response to the book, and you were a big part of that early, and folks associated with the Bad Roman, was warm enough toward me that I said, well, as long as I have the time to keep doing this, I maybe I should keep doing it. And as the feedback has come in, I've said, well, maybe I should expand what I offer to people. And I think that's one of the things that caught your eyes is one of the weekly articles that I've done that you contacted me about and wanted to talk about.
Right. I think that's funny too, because when we started this project 5 years ago, over 5 years ago now, but I was concerned about, well, what are we going to talk about all the time? How much can we talk about Christian anarchy and, no king but Christ? How much can we talk about that? And we, at the time of this recording, we just published our 140th episode.
Wow, very good.
It's interesting to see. I was talking to my producer the other day. I said, man, I'm having a hard time finding guests, because used to it was pretty easy. You could see something, contact them, but it seemed like it was kind of waning a little bit. And she suggested that I go on social media and ask the listeners to send us guests and see how that would go. Let them do the work for us. And I did that, and it helped. But for 5 years, and I always get a little paranoid or worried that I'm not going to have the content to put out. but it never fails. Something happens,
Good.
something comes up, and just this month alone, I got 4 recordings.
Very good.
You know, and you're one of them. So, and that was probably 3 weeks ago that I was worried about it, and then all of a sudden I got 4 recordings scheduled in August. So that's pretty. It's been one of the most interesting parts of this is seeing how I feel like it's something that God provides. Like if there's something that needs to be talked about, then there's going to be a door that opens up along the way. We've not missed one episode in 5 years. We had one where we missed a week because of some technical difficulties and we just pushed it back a week. But other than that, we've not missed one episode. And so it's pretty cool. I think I need to quit being so worrisome about it and just let it happen as it goes.
Well, since I found you guys back in 2023, I don't think I've missed hearing an episode either. You're always there every other Thursday. I find you easily through Spotify. I got you followed there, and so it pops up as soon as a new one's ready. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I appreciate your support and listening to us.
Hey folks, we have set up a very simple way to donate to the Bad Roman Project through spotfund.com. Just go to SpotFund and search No King But Christ. This has become necessary to continue to provide a quality podcast and keep production costs down as well. Just $5 or $10 a month will go a long way in helping us keep this project going and continue spreading the very basic message of No King But Christ. So if you like what we were doing and can find it within your budget, go to spotfund.com and search No King But Christ, and you can set up monthly donations or even donate one time. Any and all donations help more than you know, and as always, any donations above production costs will go directly to charities in Memphis, Tennessee. Thank y'all so much. Now back to the show.
This article that you wrote for your Substack is called Judas, the OG Christian Nationalist. And this, when I saw this, this is interesting to me because I've never considered him being a Christian nationalist, or let alone the OG Christian nationalist. It just never something that I would ever considered. And I don't know why, but after reading your article, I understand now. But I want to, what was it is this something you've always kind of believed forever, for as long as you can remember, or is it something that happened that maybe you started thinking about a little bit more that made you want to write about this?
It's not something that I've thought about for a long, long time. But then again, neither was anarchy.
Right.
I'm maybe the last 10 years into really understanding voluntarism and rules but no rulers, and how Christianity, genuine early church Christianity, points you in that direction socially.
Right.
You can have other discussions about theologically, but socially, Christianity points you into the direction of anarchy, voluntary associations, consent-based associations, and that led me to dig deeper into my previous beliefs. And one thing that has interested me is the Judas question. Things like, why would God choose Judas to be one of the apostles? I tackled that in a Sunday buffet portion because I went through a gospel reading on Judas there. So Judas is quite a figure because in popular Christianity, it's like, oh, he's just the worst. But if you read through the gospel accounts and really reflect on the person of Judas, he's the normie. He's the normal guy. The other apostles, the ones that stick closer to Jesus, they're the weirdos. Like, they're the freaks. They're the outcasts. They're the outliers. So is Jesus. Judas is the normal guy. And the big betrayal that Judas makes, I don't think it's spoken about because it's basically what most people who identify as Christian today participate in. Like, who's the first guy that wanted Jesus to change and bend to fit in more with the ruling class? The first guy that was close to Jesus, not the first guy who opposed Jesus, because there's plenty of people like that. Who's the first guy who was supposed to be with Jesus and learning from Jesus and had been given so many opportunities and so much responsibility? Who's the first guy who took all that and said, you know what would make this better? If it were more compatible with the doggone government. It's Judas. He's the guy. That's him. And if you look at modern Christian nationalism, which itself is nothing new, there's been 1,700 years of Christendom going up through Europe and then fanning out to the European sphere of influence in the rest of the world. But like, who's the first guy? It's Judas. And if you look at modern Christian nationalism, yeah, there's a 1,700-year lineage. The article you referenced, the title is Judas, the OG Christian Nationalist. The subtitle is, and the unofficial patron saint for 1,700 years of shameful Christendom. This is it. Like, this is the guy. This is what you see all around you as Judas. During the ridiculous fascism over COVID, which I keep calling the COVID hoax, I very early in that kept referring to what was happening in Christian circles, especially by Christian leaders, as Judas-like behavior. These guys are all Judases. And the people following them are mini Judases. Like I as soon as I understood more about what Judas was really doing, his attitude, what his actions really meant, I started to identify Judas in more of popular Christianity. Once you see it, you can't unsee it.
That's maybe I have not spent enough time really studying the person of Judas. You know, I guess I've always just looked at him as the guy that turned Jesus in for some money, because it was, you know, to me, it was the greed. He was greedy and he wanted some money. But I've never really considered. But then also too, this comes up almost every year too, that there's a saying that goes around, Judas ate too, and I've got it tattooed on my arm but I don't know enough about Judas apparently, because when you think about what Jesus knew that Judas was going to do, Jesus still fed him and Judas, and he still washed his feet, even knowing what Judas was about to do or had already done. So that's interesting. Maybe I need to spend more time just looking into that, because that's not something that's ever clicked with me until I kind of read this. And even after reading your article, I'm still pretty ignorant to what you're talking about a little bit. That's why I wanted to get you on to talk about this, because it caught my attention. And it's a new topic that we've not covered on here before. So what I'd like to do is kind of start at the beginning. And you make a good point in the article. It says, what do Judas and the other apostles witness over the last few days of Jesus' mortal life? And you point out, too, that at that time, those folks, nothing seemed out of the ordinary to them. It was just Jesus doing his thing, you know. But us reading the Bible, we have a different perspective, because we already know what happened. But before it all happened there, they didn't understand what was really going down.
Yep.
And you know, let's set the scene a little bit, too, because Jesus was going on and talking to people. And then his opponents would come and be contentious with him and ask him questions and stuff, but to the onlookers, it looked like they just wanted to meet with him formally. I never would consider that either, too. Talk about that a little bit, too, because I think it's interesting, too, that Jesus was going about his ministry. No one was going to happen to him, no matter what. But the onlookers just saw it as them meeting formally, you know, and I thought that was an interesting point you made in the article.
Sure, Jesus does things in public spaces quite often. And the confrontations for what we now know as Holy Week, those occur in the temple area. So these are out in the public. So imagine you're seeing this. This is a preacher in the temple area, which has happened before. Jesus has been doing it for parts of 3 years. So it's not like, oh, who's this Jesus guy that showed up? I mean, 2 years earlier, it would have been, who's this guy? But by this time, people know him. He's met with Pharisees in their homes when he's been questioned by them. He's never shied away from questions before in public spaces. The scribes and the Pharisees have sent representatives, or sometimes directly themselves, have gone up to him when he's been in these public spaces to ask him questions and sometimes to debate with him. So the things that are happening in real time for the people there in Jerusalem during these last days of Jesus's life that they don't know are the last days of his life. Maybe they're a little more intense than normal, but they may be different a little bit in degree, but they're not different in kind. It's not as if Jesus was suddenly doing something that was way out of character for him. John records the first thing Jesus does when he comes to Jerusalem the first time as a public preacher is he goes into the temple and starts tossing over the tables of the money changers. So Jesus being confrontational is not new by this point in his ministry. Authorities taking up that task with Jesus directly in public, sometimes privately, but many times in public, is also nothing new. So you're looking at, well, what's new this time that hadn't happened before? And one of those things is that Judas this time decides maybe this is the time this is getting old, right? Every year we come to Jerusalem after traveling around, and every year there's fights in the temple area. Every year we go through, and every year we get chased out of towns, and we got to go lay low for a little while and maybe hide out a little bit. Every year we got to go through this. Wouldn't things be much better for everyone involved if we got along a little better with the Israelite authorities? Wouldn't it be better if we had bigger audiences? Wouldn't it be better if we weren't seen as outsiders? Wouldn't all that be better? Wouldn't it be better if we could have more legitimate influence in the public sphere? These are all the things that modern Christians involved in politics talk about. You can see the beginnings of that attitude in the person of Judas and how he starts to act out on his intentions this third trip to Jerusalem, this third annual trip to Jerusalem. The Gospel of John records 3 Passovers that Jesus and his followers celebrate during his public ministry. So this is the third of 3. So this has been building for a while. So that's really the scene there. And it does ratchet. I mean, Judas is not wrong if he's thinking that, it's ratcheting up a little bit this time. Yeah, it is. I mean, the Gospel of Matthew records Jesus going through all the woe to you Pharisees, woe to you hypocrites. I think it's chapter 23 or chapter 24. I mean, those are fighting words back then.
Yeah.
I liken that to almost what happened January 6, 2021 in the U.S., when you had a mob of protesters going into the temple there in Washington, D.C., and all of the leaders, the authority figures, getting scared and running away and hiding. That quite literally happened during that last trip of Jesus and his followers into Jerusalem.
Yeah.
We're even told in the Bible, in the Gospels, that the authorities wanted to arrest him, but they feared the crowds. What do you think's happening there? Start to read these things deeply. As to, what does that mean that the authorities want to arrest somebody, but they're afraid of the crowds? What must that scene be like for authority figures who just kick down your door whenever they want? No knock warrants. The the Palestine Jerusalem version 2,000 years ago. What would have to happen for those people to be like, let's hold off for a while. Let's look for a different opportunity to do this. So put yourself into what is a tumultuous scene. And how are different people reacting, responding to it? And within that environment, there's the person of Judas, who has a reaction that no one else is described as having, perhaps because no one else has access to Jesus. But I mean, I would argue that Judas is, like I said at the beginning of this conversation, I think Judas is the normal guy. He's not the weirdo. Think about all the crowds that cheered when Jesus was being persecuted on his way to the cross. I wrote about that in my book, how the normal people were against Jesus. So I think in our modern society, we look at Judas as the outlier. as the one who's different from everybody else. And frankly, I think anthropologically and historically and sociologically, I think it's just inaccurate. And it's right there in the Bible accounts. The people faithful to Jesus are the minority, especially when the heat turns up. Judas is the normie.
When you see that a lot too, with even in today's day and time, where there are a lot of parallels here, and especially when you brought up 2020, you saw how they just kind of went along to get along. Even Christians went along to get along, shut down churches and stuff to go along with what the government was telling them to do.
Mm-hmm.
And because the heat was being turned up, there was a few of us, some of us out there standing up against them and refusing to go along with all this stuff. Okay. But that's an interesting point too, because once you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen or stay out of the kitchen, type deal. It's kind of one of those things. You can't stand the heat. Why are you're gonna fall away from what Jesus is wanting us to do, and you're working out of fear. And we know government works based off of fear. If they can keep you afraid, they can keep you subservient to them as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's a great point. If things like you said, ratcheting up, which is going to kind of lead into this next point with, you see how Judas took advantage of that because of his greed, and then you see how Jesus' other opponents took advantage of Judas's greed to have Jesus arrested, to get him, then to ultimately have him crucified. Yeah,
the only hint that Jesus gives, or the most pointed hint that Jesus gives, is in one of the Gospels, I forget which one, he's described as saying to some followers a few days before it happens that he's going to be handed over to be crucified. But that's a Roman punishment. That would have been a really confusing statement. Like, hey, the Romans are going to come after me. Why? We don't have records in the Bible of like Judas going up to Roman centurions and arguing with them. So that would have been a really strange thing to say. I mean, it's what happened. But I mean, the visible strife that Jesus has socially is with the Israelite authorities and with the people who support the Israelite authorities, not with the Romans. So it's somewhat of a confusing time for a lot of people here. We take that for granted that we know what happened,
right,
as we read about it 2,000 years later. But to be in that time, you don't know what's going on. You don't know everything that's going on. Very few people do. Everybody has their little bit that they know about. And then there's Jesus, who knows everything. But everybody else knows their little piece, and that's it. And, hindsight is 20/20. Like, looking back, you could revisit some of the things that Jesus says. Oh, of course that refers to that. But would you have realized that in real time? Would you have known any of this? This is the second year in a row during Holy Week that I wrote about Judas. So I've written about, like, Judas is my Holy Week go-to. That's Substack. I've written for 2 Holy Weeks, and both times Wednesday of Holy Week, because Wednesday is known in Holy Week as Spy Wednesday, because it commemorates what Judas does. So it's the second week in a row that second year in a row that I've written that week about Judas, because he really is a fascinating character.
Well, speaking of Judas, and you also said he's in card playing terms an easy mark.
Yeah.
He has no read at all on what cards the chief priests are holding, and he wildly overplays his own hand.
Judas, there's no indication that Judas wants Jesus to be killed. In fact, when Judas finds out what the chief priests and scribes intend to do afterwards, Judas is upset. And that's recorded in the Bibles. Like, Judas is upset about that. Like, no, that's not what I wanted. That's not why I went to you guys to arrange this meeting and said, yes, I will bring you to him and bring him to you. That's not what I was going for. Judas thinks he's going into this meeting for one reason, and the chief priests and scribes have something else in mind, and they just play Judas. Yeah, I mean, Judas is blinded by, that notion of, yeah, he's going to be the guy to bring he's going to be the compromiser.
Like a fiddle.
Right? He's going to be the grand negotiator who finds a compromise. Judas is going to bring about true bipartisanship in Jerusalem. Right? That's what he's doing. He's the moderate. He's the centrist. He's the sensible guy. Can't we just be practical and talk this out? Can't we get our committee together and talk about this here? This is what Judas looks like the more I dig into the Bible accounts and who he is. And yeah, he gets played because, again, he doesn't know everything either. He knows what he knows, and he has his own intentions, but he doesn't have the chief priests and scribes' intentions. He doesn't have the Sanhedrin's intentions or the Pharisees' intentions. He doesn't have their intentions either. So it's to me, it's fascinating.
It is fascinating. And it's a great segue into this next part too, because you mentioned that what we were just talking about, that he overplayed his hand, not knowing what they were going to do when they arrested Jesus. And then this next part in your article is called Antichrist is Worse Than Contra Christ.
Mm-hmm.
I want to kind of talk about that a little bit, and just in case people haven't heard these. I mean, everybody's heard Antichrist before, but has everybody heard Contra Christ? So I want you to kind of explain that a little bit, because I like what you said about once Jesus, or I'm sorry, not Jesus, but what Judas understood was actually happening after he turned Jesus in. He was very upset about it.
Yep.
Very upset about it.
Yes.
Let's talk about Antichrist is worse than Contra Christ.
Okay, so Contra Christ is what most people mean when they say Antichrist.
Okay.
They think it means someone who's against. But anti, that prefix, does not really mean against or opponent.
Right.
It means impostor.
Right.
And the Antichrist to me is worse than the Contra Christ. This is something I've revisited a few times in writing, is that if you honestly just reject Jesus, or you honestly just don't know enough about him, and you're just maybe Contra Christ or ambivalent, that's not as bad as wanting to change Jesus. Trying to change Jesus into something else is worse than just flat out saying no. As bad as it is to just say no to Jesus, it's worse to take Jesus and try to change Jesus to fit some other ideal. That's the Antichrist. So the Antichrist is always someone who has a partial affinity for Jesus, because at the very least they realize the usefulness of Jesus. And it's that usefulness of Jesus that they then take and try to repurpose for whatever else they do. All of government is that. All of government that is done as saying, oh yes, we're a Christian nation, or we're a Christian people. Well, all of that is taking some parts of the Christian message and trying to repurpose them for something that is frankly an impostor. It's evil. So I have fantastic conversations with people who will tell me, like, they're either atheists or they're agnostic or they're not sure, because they're not trying to turn Jesus into something else. But some of the most difficult conversations are the people who insist on identifying as Christian, but who are trying to turn Jesus into something else. And that's a tougher battle in some ways.
Oh, you're speaking to the choir. I've been dealing with that for over 5 years now, and it still goes on.
Well, that's the Antichrist. It's not the person who just says no. Contra is opponent. Contra is against. Anti is imposter. Judas is the imposter. He's trying to make Jesus be something else. That's worse than just saying no, or saying not yet, or saying, I'm confused. There's plenty of times in Jesus' ministry where people walk away from Jesus because they don't understand, or it just hits them as too difficult and too challenging in the moment. But none of those people are referred to as betrayers. But Judas is referred to as a betrayer, because that's what betrayal is. It's an impostor. It's not the honest opponent.
Well, then you went on to say that Judas wants to change Jesus to be supportive of something inherently intrinsically evil, the coercive civil government, authority, aka government.
Yep.
And we see that today with Christians.
Yes.
All the time. And you just brought it up. You're absolutely right. Those are the toughest conversations to have. I have much easier conversations with agnostic folks and atheists. Well, maybe not so much atheists. Some of them can be very militant, but agnostics I can have a conversation with, because a lot of agnostics I've talked to like the things that Jesus was talking about, like the person of Jesus, but they have a hard time with Christians. And I totally understand their point of view on that.
I have a hard time with some people who identify as Christian. Most of the people in government identify as Christian, in the U.S. at least.
Well, yeah.
For 1,700 years in the Europe and Europe influence sphere in the world, just about everybody identified as Christian. It was part of your social status to say you're a Christian.
Yeah.
So yeah, that happens, and it keeps happening, and it's something to guard against. I try,
Yeah, I think it's something we're gonna have to deal with for the rest of time. But I don't think that means we stop having the conversations either. I think we should keep having the conversations, because there are other people still wanting to hear what we're talking about. And I call them remnant all the time. Just keep talking.
Sure. I mean, Judas's betrayal and Jesus' persecution and death, I mean, that didn't stop the gospel message.
Right.
That didn't, I mean, it took him a while. It was difficult to have to witness that and live through it. But there were enough faithful people to Jesus and to Jesus's message who wanted to live that out. They firmly believed in it. So, yeah, the fact that there are Contra Christs and Antichrists out there, well, there have been Contra Christs and Antichrists since the time of Christ.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's not new. The new flavors we can sometimes think, oh, this is a new thing. But again, it's a new flavor. It's not a new category.
Hey folks, do you like salsa? I love salsa. I have come up with a fire recipe, and we have been shipping this homemade salsa all across the country. If you like salsa and want a cool way to support the project and spread the message of no king but Christ, then holler at us. You can reach us at badromansalsa@gmail.com or visit the official Bad Roman Salsa Facebook page and message us there. Thank y'all so much for your continued support. Now let's get back to the show.
Well, this next part, and I love that you put this in here too. You said the problem for Judas and subsequent government loyalists is that there are zero examples in the canonical Gospels of Jesus modeling or preaching coercion as a means of fulfilling the responsibilities of discipleship. On the other hand, there are plentiful instances of Jesus countering coercive tactics, especially as found as institutional levels. And I think and you said you addressed that in your book, and you did, but I want to talk about it again, because it's something like we were just talking about. It's still happening today. They think they can make quote unquote civil government more Christian, get enough of right people into civil government that are aligned with Christianity, that call themselves Christians. But you just pointed out they all call themselves Christians for the most part, but so, and I've made this point more than once on the show. If that's the case, if we're getting all these Christians into office, maybe Christians are making this worse by being entangled with all this mess.
Yeah, it's a 1,700-year question. Once I refer to what happens during Emperor Constantine's reign, in the Roman Emperor Constantine. It really is an inflection point. An inflection point in math, for people who want to get a little detail about it. An inflection point in a graph is when the sign changes from positive to negative. So it's like a change in direction. And I think it's a great description to use for what happens in the 300s AD. It's an inflection point. The incentives in this world for identifying as Christian completely flip. It used to be to identify as Christian was something socially risky. It did not give you extra power in society. In fact, it was a deliberate relinquishing of that kind of relationship with other people. It put you in harm's way, in jeopardy. You didn't have as many, say, job opportunities, economic opportunities. It sometimes jeopardized your safety. So that's what it meant to be a Christian socially in the world. It meant that the people who believed in might makes right were against you and were coming after you, and that you had to find a way to counter that without taking on that same characteristic. And then in the time of Constantine says, okay, we're not going to persecute Christians anymore, because Constantine's a good politician. He sees that the persecution isn't working, so why not just co-opt the popularity of these Christians? And he goes down that road. And the Christians, on one hand, they're very grateful for some guy to say, we're not going to persecute you anymore. Oh, thank you. But they then fall for it themselves, start becoming apologists for the Roman Empire. This is 1700 years old. And now your incentives for being a Christian are that you get stuff. You get more social status. You get power. You get more material opportunities. And in fact, if you don't identify as a Christian after a while, there's something wrong with you. So it becomes like everybody just, I have to identify as a Christian. It completely changes what it means to identify as a Christian in the world.
So this topic of Constantine and the early church, I think it's all relevant, first of all, but this is something that when I first started kind of going back to early church history, noticing how the church started changing it. And I've had people tell me, no, it was even before Constantine, but it kind of looks like Constantine, when they kind of merged together, that's when the face of the church changed.
Mm-hmm.
And there was I've had so many different conversations about this with people privately, not necessarily on the show, that I'm trying to point out to them. I said there was no need for the church to get in bed with the state at that time.
Mm-hmm.
There was no need. It changed what it looks like, what Jesus intended it to be. It changed what Jesus was teaching to his followers at the time before he was crucified. Like you said, it's been a 1700-year problem now. Mm-hmm. But I think people need to take that seriously, because if you can't look at what happened when they all got in bed together, when the church got in bed with the state, if you can't look at it and realize what was going on there, I don't know how else to explain it to people, because it's so obvious to me, and it sounds like it's obvious to you what was going on there. And maybe you can help me explain it to somebody if they're listening to this show, and they can use this as a resource. When the church got involved, entangled with the state at that time, how it changed the face of the church. If you could give us some more points on that, or what the way you see it, because this is a topic that is coming up a lot lately with me. For some reason, I'm having different conversations with people.
Yeah, it confuses the issue. The reason why the Antichrist is worse than the Contra Christ is because the Contra Christ at least might be honest about Christ. The Antichrist, the impostor, there's something inherently, intrinsically, innately, unavoidably dishonest about being an impostor. I still hear every now and then in Christian circles people reference the two swords with respect to church and state relationships. The two swords, you're like wondering, what's the two swords? It goes back to Hosios of Cordova and the doctrine of the two swords. It's one of the three models that I mentioned in this article you wanted to talk about. Three popular pro-government Antichrist frameworks that emerged in this period shortly after Constantine and his cronies within the church hierarchy reaching an agreement. Basically, as I wrote later in the article, basically doing what Judas wanted to have happen 300 years earlier. Right? And that's one of the models, is that the church, the church and the state are separate but equal. Where have we heard separate but equal before in our country's history, right?
Yeah.
So the church and the state are separate but equal. But there are other ones as well. There was the Ambrose of Milan, another prominent figure in Christian history. He has an allegedly biblical model where the church and the state overlap and are subservient depending on the issue.
Yeah.
But it's still it's this attempt to give a validity. It's apologizing for the state. And then Eusebius of Caesarea, his cultural model was where the Roman emperor is sort of God's vice regent alongside the bishops. So they each have kind of their same spheres, but then they keep connecting here and there throughout. It's all people trying to apologize for the Roman Empire. And by extension, if you can apologize for the Roman Empire, then you've apologized for any form of government anywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, if you can apologize for something that sets itself up to be a god, that oppresses people, that uses constant double standards, considers people second-class citizens, every time they overrun a new territory, that operates completely via at weapon point by scaring people, by either inflicting harm or the credible threat of the infliction of harm. I mean, if you can apologize for that, just by using some Christian terminology with it, then, you can apologize for any other, for any form of coercive civil authority, any monopoly violence institution. And it's unfortunate, but this was happening. And I think something you brought up, that was this bubbling under the surface before the time of Constantine? Yes, it probably was, because you're very aware of some of the debates that went on. The fact that there were early Christian figures who spoke out against military excursions and participating in military excursions. Well, they wouldn't have talked about that if there wasn't a debate going on. They wouldn't have talked about that if it wasn't an issue. Can you serve in the government in what they called nonviolent roles? So they tried to describe as nonviolent roles. Well, that debate wouldn't have been going on if there hadn't been some people saying, yes, we should. Like, nobody would have written about these things. Writing was very labor intensive and resource intensive. It's not like today where writing is so easy to do on electronic devices. The written word is everywhere. Back then, you're not writing about something, especially formally, unless the issue is already being discussed, unless it's something that already matters. So I think the people who are making that point to you are correct, but it's a difference in order of magnitude when suddenly the emperor and officials in the church hierarchy, who have been supposedly charged with ministering to people's souls, to their better natures, when suddenly those people start working together to apologize for the state. Not because they're making Christianity any better. You can't. What Christ left for us can't be improved upon. It can only be made worse. And so really, the history of Christianity is trying to not make it worse and trying to correct it when you see it sliding. But you can't improve upon Christianity. The church doesn't get better because it's has an alliance with the government. That's insane for you and I to think about or to say. But for most people, they think that, isn't Christianity better now that it's popular and that, we can say God and the Pledge of Allegiance says under God, and every president ends his speeches with God bless America. And, Congress has prayer services every year, and isn't it great that they put the 10 Commandments in government buildings
and schools?
No, that's not great.
Are you familiar with Adam Curry?
I don't know if I am by name, but if you describe what he talks about, maybe.
Well, he's considered the original podcaster, the Podfathers, what they call him.
Oh.
I think he was on MTV at one time years ago.
Oh.
But I think I hope I'm not messing this up. I think he's a fairly new Christian, or calls himself a Christian.
Okay.
But I heard him, and this has been maybe last year, I heard him on the Joe Rogan podcast. And he was describing his faith and stuff. And then I don't remember what led to this statement he made, but it made me want to put my head through the wall. He said, government is in place of God right now.
It is. If he's saying he wants that to happen, he endorses it, that's a problem. But all governments are religions and have been since the beginning of civilization.
100%. No, I think he believes it and wants it to that he considers it in a placement of God until Jesus returns or something like that. But when he said it, and I wish I posted it on our Facebook page when I heard it, but when I heard it, I'm telling you, Dominic, I've heard a lot of things over the past 5 years, and when I heard him say that, I was like, this sounds just so familiar to a lot of things I hear from other people, but to hear it on such a big platform like that, it made. We're probably hearing, people are probably hearing that in their churches too anyway. But when you were describing these three models, that popped into my head what he said on that Rogan podcast.
Sure. And he's not doing anything new.
No.
That's the normal stuff. Yeah, you mentioned the Joe Rogan podcast. Almost as good a podcast as the Bad Roman.
Appreciate that. So, maybe we'll reach those numbers one of these days.
You never know, right? And, I don't want to comment on what might be his personal faith because I don't know what's in someone's heart, but an expression like that is clearly it's the majority opinion.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Those are the influences that you see in the world.
I love how you ended this article.
Okay.
Because everything that we've talked about up to this point, you would think the way that things have gone that it could have been completely fatal to the teachings of Christ or the original, how the early Christians behaved and stuff. But you said miraculously, this 1700-year Judas-like illness hasn't been totally fatal to genuine Christian social morality. Though a minority today, some anarchist voluntarists, good neighbors, and bad citizens do exist, as have persisted in every age since Jesus' tumultuous time. And I think what's so interesting about that is because it seems like people like us who, and I'm not trying to put me or you above anybody else, but with the way we think differently than now compared to the way we used to think, years ago, depending on how long you've been on this journey, it seems like we're small in numbers. But what I'm also noticing too more and more is it seems like more people are starting to ask more questions because they're recognizing something is wrong with the church and the entanglement with the state. Mm-hmm. And it's very encouraging. I had that happen to me yesterday at a farmer's market. This lady walked up, but she's been listening to the show. Somebody local's been listening to the podcast and told me we've almost got her convinced to be an anarchist. She goes, I still vote. And I was like, we'll get you there. Just keep listening. But I think I about got her convinced to come on the show because she serves at a local church. And it'd be nice to hear her story a little bit and see where she used to be and where she's at right now.
You're involved in a lot of that, it sounds like, where you're meeting people who are asking questions. I mean, I get a little bit of that more so online.
Yeah.
I get people asking about what looks like a dissonance rather than a harmony between church and state.
Yeah.
So it's good for people to ask questions. Jesus never minded people asking him questions.
Right. Yeah.
And people who had honest questions, genuine questions, they got very encouraging answers.
Right.
Those who are asking manipulative questions got, again, honest answers, but their manipulation got turned back on them.
Yeah, he was very savvy that way with the if somebody asked him a stupid question to try and trap him or something, he would just ask him another question.
Right. He always gave people the right answer, but depending on where their heart was in approaching the subject and in asking the question, the right answer for them may have exposed them.
Yes.
And even this is something that's been a long-standing belief in the church and especially sacramentally. I know that the Bad Roman is mostly concerned with social Christianity, how people interact with each other here. But in sacramental Christianity, this idea that the church is for imperfect people. If ministers aren't perfect, then doesn't that taint what we celebrate? Well, not necessarily. If you get baptized, is your baptism tainted because the minister of the baptism, the administrator of the baptism is not a perfect person? No. No, the sacrament is an act of God, not an act of a human. It's an acknowledgement by humans of the acts of God. For those Christians who celebrate more of the sacraments, up to all 7 that Jesus leaves in the Gospels. I'm one of those Christians. Is reconciliation invalid because the priest who prays the absolution prayer with you is an imperfect person? No, the sacrament is an act of God. So that's why I say miraculously the Judas-like illness hasn't been totally fatal to genuine Christian social morality. It also hasn't been fatal to faithful theology, to faithful relationships with the divine, with the holy transcendence, with who we call God. Because our imperfections are not deal breakers for us. And I think there's a temptation to look at human imperfections as a deal breaker. And I would encourage people not to fall into that kind of despair. So, if you see a prominent new self-identified Christian on a popular media thing, and he seems to say things sometimes that don't seem to square with genuine Christianity, that's a reason to pray for that person and maybe to grapple with the issue yourself to make sure that you have it correct. It's not a reason to abandon God.
Right.
Or to abandon the practice of virtue with your neighbor.
Right.
It's not a reason to abandon realizing the love of God for you, which is the first half of the greatest commandment, nor is it a reason to forego acting with virtue to other people horizontally, which is the second half of the greatest commandment. Love your neighbor as you have been shown love by God. So yes, it's key to what I believe, and I don't believe a lot, but what I believe is deep, or at least I think it's deep because I haven't been able to exhaust it yet. But part of the things I believe is that a genuine Christianity is not invalidated simply because people are imperfect. In fact, it exists because people have limits and have to learn how to meet those limits and push out maybe against them from the inside to expand them and to open them up and to let more grace in.
Yeah. I love that.
So that how I ended this article is how I try to end a lot of articles, because sometimes I write about things that can seem very depressing, but I never want to end an article by saying, yeah, the things that went wrong, those are the things that win. The things that went wrong are the things that, we all just have to agree with now and learn to endorse. We have to learn how to mitigate them, but we don't have to endorse them. We have to deal with the fact that Judas existed and that he was a lot more normal than the people who were faithful to Christ. And we have to deal with the fact that Judas is unfortunately the model for modern Christianity and for all of Christendom. We have to mitigate that. We don't have to endorse it. And there's a good to be found even in the fact that people haven't always done the right thing, because none of us always does the right thing.
That's awesome. Very well said, my friend. I think that's an awesome way to end the show too. I mean, it reminded me of something. Listening to you talk reminded me of something. Talking about how imperfect people, but we'll get pushback sometimes about if we quote somebody who's obviously not a perfect person and they find something wrong with the person, so that makes the quote invalid. And I always come back with, well, that's stupid. First of all, because if you have to be a perfect person to have the proper quote to explain something, then we should all just keep our mouths shut.
It's literally stupid. It's literally a logical fallacy for you logicians out there called ad hominem.
Yeah.
It is a very blatant mistake in thinking. Yes.
Well, why don't we end that here? I think that was awesome. And I didn't realize I'd let 2 years go before getting you back on the show, and I apologize for that. You've got a ton of content that I can go through, and we can have more conversations down the road as well.
Absolutely. I haven't written another book. In fact, I'm surprised I wrote the first one in the first place. But I I try to continue the conversation weekly on my Substack. So I mean, people can find more of what I do there. And I'm not as open to say delving into each one to the extent that you and I have done here in this great conversation. But yeah, I love having conversations with people in the comments sections, in chats, in even private messages. And occasionally, someone says, "Hey, I got an interview show I do. Do you want to come on and hash it out more in detail?" And I say yes to them. So yeah, conversations are good. I appreciate what you're doing because I know how difficult it is. Like my podcast does not have conversations.
Yeah.
My podcast is just me for half an hour.
Yeah, I don't think I could do that. Talking by myself. I've never tried to do a solo podcast, and somebody asked me one time when they said, "Do you have a podcast?" I was like, "Yes." Yeah. Well, do you have guests? I said, I have to have somebody to play off of.
Yeah, so you're the opposite of me.
I would ramble on for hours on here by myself talking about nonsense, and because I could go in so many different directions, but having a guest on the show kind of keeps me centered and focused on the original topic. Because if you've left me alone to my own devices, I'm going to be all over the place.
So sometimes it happens to me too. So that's your skill that you're bringing to the conversation with the Bad Roman podcast is you're able to do these longer form interview shows that not everybody knows how to do, and not everybody knows how to get involved or even how to start that. So I'm a listener of the Bad Roman, and I'm now a very humbled return guest. This has been cool.
And you're a great example of what I encourage all the time on the show is to, you don't have to write, you don't have to do a podcast, but if you could write, if you could do a Substack, write a blog, do something, just get the message out there as any way you can. And you're a great example of that. And I appreciate your work. And speaking of your work, why don't you go ahead and plug your stuff and tell everybody where we can find it? We'll have it in the show notes as well.
The home base is at Substack, goodneighborbadcitizen.substack.com. That's the home base for the Wednesday Wake Up article, the Sunday Buffet podcast, and the Friday Meditation Radio guided audio meditation series on Friday. So all the good stuff is there. I still reference our first conversation from all the way back in the fall of 2023. I did it in an article I wrote in August, I think, or late July or early August. So every now and then something pops up from that old conversation that is still relevant. So I think that's a testament to what the Bad Roman podcast does from a content standpoint. So yeah, you'll find some Bad Roman references over at Good Neighbor, Bad Citizen. And I'm sure there will be more now that we're having another conversation here.
100%. We really appreciate your support and plugging the Bad Roman on your stuff too. Anybody can help get the word out there for us has been helpful. We're getting listeners in countries I never would have considered. Hong Kong is second on the list right now of listeners behind the United States. It's crazy.
Good.
The other day it was South Africa.
It's either there's a lot of people in Hong Kong who like the Bad Roman, or a lot of people realize that maybe if I'm listening to the Bad Roman, I probably also use a VPN. And so I put myself somewhere else in the world.
There could always be that too.
I wonder about that too. I see all sorts of countries of origin for some of my content. And I always wonder, am I really reaching someone in that country, or is that somebody using a virtual private network for their internet traffic?
Possibly. I never considered that.
Hey, I think it's going to be both. I do know that there are people listening from other parts of the world to both Bad Roman and Good Neighbor, Bad Citizen.
That's good.
I do know that. And, if they can understand my Jersey English, then they're going to get something from it. Or if they've got a good online translator for them.
Yeah, I mean, you speak much better than I do. I mean, I'm from West Texas, and if they can figure out what I'm talking about, then they're definitely gonna be able to understand what you're saying.
This is quite a conversation. A guy from West Texas and a guy from New York, New Jersey.
Dueling dialects.
Yeah.
Well, Domenic, I appreciate you coming back on the show, and we will most certainly do this again sometime. Maybe sooner rather than later, not waiting another 2 years before we do it again.
Great. Thank you.
All right, buddy. I'm going to talk to you soon.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Bad Roman podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you find your podcasts to never miss an episode. And while you're at it, if you like what you heard, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes. Or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, it really helps people find us. 100% of donations are given to local charities in Memphis, Tennessee. To learn more about the Bad Roman Project and to find show notes, please visit thebadroman.com.